What's up, interpreters? I'm Shelly Drummond, and I am the manager of guest engagement here at ZooTampa in Florida. I work with developing programs here at ZooTampa and with the volunteer program and our conservation stations.
What's up, interpreters? I am Kerry. I'm the supervisor of behavioral research, also here at ZooTampa in sunny Florida. My job here at the zoo is overseeing our animal and our visitor behavioral research, working with our animal care teams to develop stress-based or environmental-based evaluations of animal behavior, as well as working with our education or guest engagement teams to design evaluations of education and visitor programs throughout the zoo.
What is up, interpreters? I am Paul Caputo, Executive Director with NAI.
What's up, interpreters? I am Song, your NAI Events and Engagement Manager. Shelly and Kerry, thank you so much for joining us today on our podcast. Again, I just have such a privilege in seeing so many different sessions, seeing what interpreters are doing out there in the world, and your session on code-led programs. So I worked at the zoo. I know listeners are really annoyed that I have to say that all the time, but I used to work at the zoo here in Utah. And I just found your session so fascinating because a lot of times departments, while they work closely, of course, I did events at the zoo, and of course I had to talk to animal care all the time. And then my education department also had to help give me volunteers for my programs. But a lot of times it was a little siloed. So we're just going to dive right into it. How did you two decide that this would be a good idea and a good fit to have animal behavior research applied to interpretive programs?
That's a great question. And we are really lucky here because we do work very well together. A little secret is that Kerry was actually a part of the guest engagement department at one time. Kerry, do you want to talk about that internship program and how that got started?
So when I was brought on to ZooTampa to take over our behavioral research internship, it was much more of an evaluation-focused internship that spent most of our time working with our education team. So that was why it was originally bucketed under guest engagement. So when I stepped in to kind of take the direction of that program, one of the things that I was bringing in was a lot more of that animal behavior background. And so as I was trying to flesh out some more technical research methods for ethograms and other animal observations we could do, trying to figure out ways that we could ramp up some of those evaluations was another big focus that we had. And as I started working more with those animal teams, I was able to act as a strong bridge that as I built that culture of evaluation with our animal care departments, they understood how this data was applied and used. It made it a lot easier as they started to see our evaluations on the visitor side and the holes that we felt we were seeing in those programs to then be able to come back to them and say, hey, this is what we're wanting to do. And while this might be something that's very new and uncomfortable for you all, here's the data to support why we want to do it. And this is how we're going to evaluate it moving forward to make sure that this is effective.
And it's been a huge plus for us because when you are doing zoo programs, a lot of what you are navigating is the interest of the animals and the animal care staff and what you're training the animals to do. And at the same time, we are trying to engage the guests and get them excited about animals and excited about conservation. So to have us working together like that has been super. I'm really proud of that.
One of the challenges in interpretation is when you have scientific, highly technical work going on that you then need to translate or interpret for visitors. Have you found that this highly technical field of behavioral science with the animals, how difficult is that to make accessible to a visitor who is not necessarily of that field?
Oh, that's a timely question because we just started our own citizen science project at one of our volunteer conservation stations. So at our conservation stations, we engage people in a message, and at Penguin, we're engaging them in sustainability and training them about that. And then we're sharing information on our penguins. Well, the animal team wanted to know how the penguins were using their space and their habitat. And we have opened that up now to where it's a penguin habitat usage survey, and the volunteers are helping the guests actually tell the scientists behind the scenes at ZooTampa where the penguins are. Kerry, can you explain that? It's through through Microsoft Forms.
Yeah, so a lot of the times when we are evaluating the animal's behavior in the habitat, space use is something we'll look very closely at and make heat maps of distribution throughout the habitat. The challenge is having to get out there 1 to 5 times an hour, every an hour for a week or two is a lot of time that we're having to spend, but our guests are out there that entire time. And so trying to leverage the time that they're already there as a resource for us is really effective. And we found that as far as messaging the research that we have going on, we don't have too much of a difficulty. I think behavior is a very easy field of research to talk about because behavior is a universal language, whether we want it to be or not. So when this guest goes over to the tiger habitat, they're immediately going to take their own internalized understandings of their behavior and project it onto that animal. Why is this animal alone? Is that going to make them lonely? That makes them sad. And so in a lot of cases, it doesn't feel challenging to talk about the research that we're doing because all we're doing is trying to put the behaviors in context to what they would be doing in the wild. And when you start having that conversation with people, they're usually able to really understand and connect back to their pets at home or things that they've learned before as well.
And at Penguin, we just connect what they've done and share with them that that's something that researchers in the wild are doing in South Africa. So it's very exciting.
I never would have actually put those two things together.
Mhm.
But yes, the guests really are out there from open until close all day, every day. I find that interpreters have a difficult time figuring out how to evaluate their programs, like in general as a whole. Is it return visitors, right? Is it an increase in memberships? Is it word of mouth referrals? So does your program, how does your program then take these evaluations and really apply them to the interpretive program as a whole or as the zoo experience as a whole?
Okay, so we have a manatee critical care center here and manatees in rehabilitation. And so we're talking manatees all the time. We love the manatees. One of the things that we have is a series of they're conservation stations, but there are a bunch of activities where we're communicating with the guests and they're playing games to learn about recycling, to learn about watershed, and basically the things that they can do to help the manatees when they go back out into the wild. So it's an extremely active area, 3 stations, in fact, and it can be very, very busy. And to have the behavioralists there, they can actually watch from the side and do an analysis just on what the guests are asking. And they can do the documentation and they can come back and share with us that information.
The types of data that you can collect while engaging with a guest are going to be very limiting. You can use a clicker to keep track of how many guests there are, how many people you recognize. But looking at things such as, did this guest read the sign before they came over and engaged with me? Was the contents of this question fully based off of their previous experience, or was it something that we set up for them? And to understand that this space as a whole is going to be contributing to the interpretation as well. And so having that separate researcher really helps us to see that. And it lets us go a lot more specific with the goals for each station. And so where our station on one side of our manatee pools might be focusing on pollution, looking at ways that the environment can impact manatees and how your actions and your choices have an impact on manatee conservation. The other side of our manatee space that is directly over our hospital is going to have very different objectives set, that we don't have actions that people can directly do relating to how they can critically care for manatees, but there are things that they can do in that space by learning about the stories of what led a manatee to come in and forming this bond. And by increasing the empathy with manatees there, we are going to be pushing them similarly on their conservation journey. Whereas in a different direction, it's still effective. And so one of the big things that we like to do is have program specific objectives, that this is what this program is designed to do. If the program is based around empathy, we'll be really measuring those emotional outcomes from the guest. Whereas if we want to look for those repeat visitors who are choosing to recommit to manatee conservation and come back again in the future, we might evaluate those return guests differently for a different station then.
And the other cool piece to this is that we are working from the beginning to the end with the behavioralist. So Kerry can ask he can come up with a series of questions that he thinks is important. But maybe, for instance, we want to know what the kinds of questions that the interpreters are asking the guests and how that affects what they're taking away from the program. So we did, when we were doing our co-led programs, we were also evaluating or assessing that question that everybody always asks is, does anybody have any questions? It's the invite question. Usually you would think you want to make sure to give the guests that time to ask a question. But what we found, Kerry, I think you can answer that on the invite question. I'm going to have Kerry give you the real numbers because he's the mather.
So we always felt like that, do you have any questions? Question was just really a cop-out. When it comes to continuing the conversation, it is requiring the guests to take the lead and choose the direction of where it's heading. And it's just a really lazy way as an interpreter to let that conversation, especially in a program where you have a specific end goal that you were trying to reach. And so originally with our evaluation, we found that for a tour behind the scenes, we would hear about 4 of those almost per tour. And we really were trying to hammer home, stop saying that. And so our first round of redesign for this program, we tried to incorporate in a lot more opportunities to ask closed-ended questions and open-ended questions as part of that initial script. And by having those questions built in, we saw that the number of closed-ended questions we asked nearly doubled. Same with the number of open-ended questions, whereas the number of invites that we would ask dropped by about a third. And so we see that we're inviting them for questions less, but we're asking a lot more questions directly, which by itself we viewed as a success. But when we look at the guest questions, we found that the number of questions that they would ask was exactly the same. So even though we're setting the floor up for them less often, they're still taking the initiative to do it just as often, meaning as long as they feel comfortable and they feel welcomed to be a part of this conversation, they will do it on their own. And we took this a step further and we said, okay, 3 invitations for do you have any questions per tour? That's still a little bit too much. And we got it down to it's about 2 on average now. And we've seen that the number of closed-ended and open-ended questions have still increased without any impact on the number of questions. And so that was a huge success for us in leadership, because we've always hated that, do you have any questions question? And now we finally have data to show, hey, not only is it an easy way out, it doesn't actually work. So just ask them directly something that they can see now and pull them into the conversation directly.
So I have to say, my whole being just lit up when you started talking about manatees, because I'm sure I'm not alone in this. I love manatees. I've had the opportunity to go to a couple of aquariums in Florida, not ZooTampa yet, but we were at the Jacksonville Zoo. I said aquariums, but ZWPA, Zoos, Wildlife Parks, Aquarium, that sort of thing. The Jacksonville Zoo last year in connection with our conference in St. Augustine. And then more recently in Sarasota, I went to the Moat Marine Laboratory and Aquarium, and that was a very cool experience. They have at both of those places, my favorite thing was the manatees. I just love the manatees. Part of that is, they get to, be tubby and float around in warm water and just munch on lettuce all day, right? Like, and you sort of relate to that. The flip side of that is the danger of anthropomorphizing animals, especially when you're interpreting animal behavior. I can see how it could be a useful tool, but I could also see how it could almost create barriers because their motivations are different from our motivations. What is the role of anthropomorphism in interpreting animal behavior?
That's a big one. And I'm going to say something and I'm going to let Kerry, because that's one of Kerry's favorite conversations. As a writer of the programs and somebody working with training the volunteers, we go for anthropomorphizing in ways that are still scientifically relevant. They don't distract from the message or distract from the animal. So you don't want to anthropomorphize in ways that would maybe make the animal seem ridiculous. You want to maintain that dignity of the animal. But we are also, the very basic goal, the very first goal that we have with our youngest of children is to encourage empathy for the animals. And I'm going to kick it to Kerry now, because that's where it
Yes, as I'm sure you are well aware, there's a lot of really great research that is starting to come out on the roles that anthropomorphism can play in order to support empathy. We had a study here that we did at the zoo, which should be getting shared in the AZA Connect magazine here later this month. But one of the findings that we had from that was that anthropomorphism can be a really powerful tool for pushing that empathy and building that connection. And we want to focus on ways to use anthropomorphism to highlight both similarities and differences with humans, but keeping humans in mind there. If we are looking at a tiger, for example, anthropomorphizing that tiger to a young child as being a more shy animal who likes to have their space to themselves is not a misleading way to characterize a solitary species. But if you were to look out at the orangutan who is trying to get a little bit more distance from the rest of the troop due to aggression issues, and you were to say, oh, that orangutan's shy, that's going to be misrepresenting something that's there. And so using anthropomorphism to focus on those similarities and help people form that connection, but then to fully explain why these animals are different when they are different, it puts things into a scope and a lens that is more easily digestible and helps to further that journey with the animal. And so it is a very effective tool, but one that you just want to use very strategically and make sure that your anthropomorphism doesn't mischaracterize anything there.
Wow, well, my little brain I is exploding. All of this is so cool. So cool. Such great work being done out there. Shelly and Kerry, what suggestions or recommendations would you give somebody who works at a different site, not at a zoo, by linking and using animal behavior research to strengthen guest engagement? If I were working at a nature center or, a historical site, could I use similar things to help me strengthen my guest experience?
I would say across the board, I think for any institution, collecting more data is always going to be a positive and might lead you to have more data than you have uses for the data. And then figuring out how to use it can be a new challenge that you run into. But I think as you start collecting this data and really quantifying the experience that your visitors are going to have, you'll see a much different picture and you would have never understood. So some research that is very widely applicable in a lot of institutions might be timing and tracking research. As you're watching the amount of time guest spends throughout the space, what pieces of an exhibit do they go to, how long do they spend with them? We found some really nuanced things here at our zoo where guests going clockwise through an exhibit would skip certain signage but be drawn to others, whereas counterclockwise they would have the opposite effect. And a lot of it is due to just placement on the eyes as you round that corner. But we found that there were some really meaningful changes to the education experience when some of those signs are ones that we would prefer every guest to see the sign, because it talks about why our panther has a noticeable limp. And if guests are missing that, they're walking away with a very altered perception of the welfare of our animals, whereas we're trying to get ahead of that through our signage and our messaging. And so beyond just connecting animal data and animal research to the visitors, I think connecting data to your visitors in any way is going to strengthen your programs. And when the visitors see the ways that you're using data, in my experience, it only heightens the conversations even further, and they love to hear those things.
And I think all organizations, and especially now, we are all trying to communicate our and remaining relevant to our communities. This type of information will help get you past, how many people came, how many people did this. It will help you get a closer view of your relevance in the community and ways in which you can increase those connections and increase that engagement. And I think we are very special to be able to work so closely with this department here. It is improved. Our CEO just sent out a note congratulating us all on the fact that that conservation message that we are working so hard to get out there is coming across. People do understand more the amount of effort that we go into to take care of the animals, how that helps animals in the wild, and how that's a community effort, and us working with partners working with women and children. It's all of this is a community effort, and it's amazing to see. I can't put my finger on it, but it's amazing to see that recognition coming from a level of the organization that is very business oriented. And when they come down and they say, this is happening, we've got that, we're all mission based, but I absolutely credit it to the knowledge that we've gained through working with the behavioral researchers.
Okay, this question is going to seem like a little bit of a setup, and maybe it is, but do you have examples of an occasion where interpretation has helped you solve a visitor experience challenge?
I can say that on the manatee side, we started having research done when our manatee conservation, we had one conservation that was in what we call the manatee tunnel. What happened is that the manatee tunnel is now under construction. They've demolished it and they're building a new space for our guests. That is a huge interruption for people who are used to going up and getting to be face to face with manatees underwater. There was a lot of concern in the zoo as to how we're going to keep our guests happy and how we're going to continue to message this very important component of what we do in our role in this community, which is that manatee conservation and the critical care center. And so we were able to take the information and the work that we had done and to create at either side, because now the tunnel was actually a pass through, but at either side of our manatee habitat, we have interpretive stations going on right now, which are immensely popular with the guests. We have a station for young people, a station for all ages, and a station for the little tykes. We have a station that covers a lot of the hospital stuff. It's been a really incredible thing, and we are not hearing the huge complaints about that tunnel being gone. We expected to hear some. There's still some, but it really helped us overcome a problem that we knew we were going to have, but we weren't sure how to fix it. And I've been really proud of our guest engagement team for being able to power through this and help the zoo out on this level.
Shelly and Kerry, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and to give us some insight into how your co-led programs are working there at ZooTampa. Where can people find the zoo website or the work that you are doing there in Tampa?
Our zoo website is going to be zootampa.org, ZOOTAMPA, zootampa.org. On that website, you'll be able to find some new updates on happenings around the zoo. Any new exhibits or programs that get unveiled will likely be announced on there, as well as any special events or conferences that we may be hosting, such as a behavior workshop that the behavior team is hosting next month.
And interpreters, that's what's up.
What's up.